Alrighty then. So, I decided that if I'm going to do a special episode for April Fool's Day, what better thing to do one about than the Q? Because, realistic practical jokes aside, they're the race that has been over the years used for the most absurd nonsense. Stuff that, is appropriate to a April Fool's Day episode where stuff goes sideways for reasons that don't make logical sense. And, that means that if it's a Q-centric episode you're doing, you can um, do things that wouldn't make sense even in a holodeck novel. Because they involve abstract concepts that warp the very idea of space and time. Let's face it, the most famous Q episode was one where Q apparently created a illusion of the existence of something called anti-time, which was ripping apart the fabric of the universe. Because, oops, mortals did something that they didn't realize would happen. Realistically, the logic of how anti-time was created, yeah, there wasn't one. Anyways, though, so what exactly are we going to go for with Q-based stories? See, let's go with the first off thing. The standard Q that everyone remembers is the one played by John Delancey. This is the most famous one because it has the most screen time, and a lot of the others are just one-offs and so on and so forth. Here's the thing, though. If you're using a Q in a story, why use the John Delancey one? Especially if you want to surprise people with random nonsense and make them second guess the story. Because, let's face it, that's a key part of Q plots. The viewer should not be able to simply guess how it will end because they don't have enough frame of reference to fully understand what's going on. Now, for TTRPG, that does require you to have some level of idea as to where things are going, but you really don't have a reason to, shall we say, spell it out ahead of time. Yeah, this whole thing here is like the members of the Q continuum have very petty and some people could refer to it as childish reasons for doing what they're doing. In some cases, it was very literally childish, actually, but in a lot of other cases, it's more nuanced and subtle, and people don't really know why they're doing what they're doing, merely that they're doing something strange. Anyway, so let's go on with it, because here is a list of Q who have been seen as proper characters and not just background extras. I'm not going to go over all of them, but the sheer number of them says a lot about how many one-off characters actually have popped up that were Q. Some of them were intentionally set up to be one-offs. Some of them are characters that, while they were not initially meant as recurring characters, could have become recurring characters. Like this guy. This is the second Q character to ever appear. And he's one of the ones that we only ever saw once in Deja Q. Why he didn't show up in the episode Q2? Good question, don't know. But he did in fact only show up in the episode Q2. Anyway, is this one of those kind of times when there's an actor who died? No, he's not. So I suppose in theory they could have gotten him to reprise the role, but they just didn't for some reason or other. Maybe he just didn't want to reprise the role. Maybe he was busy. Who knows? I don't know. Then we have Quinn. See, Q2 was someone who was a I'm not going to say an opposite to the John Delancey Q. No. Q2 is someone who was notable for being a very similar kind of Q. He messes with mortal stuff because he thinks it's fun, but he's somewhat more responsible about it. Somewhat. Which you have in that weird conversation between Q and Q2 where they start listing off each other's mishaps and moments of stupidity. And it's one of those things you're like, so the Q talk up how they're supposedly omniscient and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, they don't actually know everything. Otherwise, they wouldn't have so many errors and mistakes. Anyways, this guy, yeah, this guy is someone who decided he'd rather die than continue being a Q. And that made things weird. This is also one of the examples of a Q doing things that break the concept of reality as people typically know it. Like, he takes the crew of Voyager to witness the Big Bang. Why? Because apparently that's something that the Q like to do. They like going back and watching the Big Bang. Because normal methods of time travel apparently don't work. Q powers do. Regular time travel apparently doesn't. Yeah, I don't get that either, but whatever. Then you have other stupidity like having the ship miniaturized to literally be floating inside a Christmas tree. Sure, why not? And so on and so forth. Again, like I said, Q have been known to do some very strange things, and sometimes write strange books. Because Q, having their immortal, ageless perspective on reality, are, you know, from a perspective of knowledge and understanding, every single one of the Q, with two exceptions, that would be Amanda and Q Jr. Those two actually had the a lifespan approximate to what normal mortal humans would have, But Quinn, this is some guy who has like the elder god level. I'm tired of all this bullshit dealing with reality, and that perspective causes him to feel things and view the universe in ways that regular people like humans would have very, very great difficulty understanding. And throwing that sort of a curveball in there for inscrutable motives is actually a pretty good idea. Because, again, he's pretending to be human. He's using a human face. Shooting him with a phaser, that's not going to kill him. He's not really a human. He's just looking like one temporarily. I mean, it's like when Cisco punched Q. He was like, "Ow, Picard never did that. It didn't actually bother him at all." Anyway, though, Then we have the female Q, who made things interesting because this is someone who is actually a recurring character. And you see he's listed in several episodes here. And also the mother of Q Jr., so, that makes things even more interesting. Anyway, though, again, these are all different things where it's like the specific reasons why Q are doing Q things for Q reasons. There's a very long list that people have already used. Like this was because led to some really, really weird stuff because of the fact that Q Jr., she wasn't really doing a good job of trying to be a mother. She really wasn't. So she left it most of the being a parent up to the John Delancey Q, who had no idea how to be a parent either. And so acquired the services of the crew of the Voyager in order to assist with that. Now, it's one of those things that from the grand scheme of things, you never really know exactly how things are going to go. Anyway, though, here we have Q Jr., who actually had multiple actors portray him because of the fact that he was seen at various ages. And of course, here's the child version, here's the adult version, blah, blah, blah. Notable for having John Delancey's actual son, Keegan Delancey, as the one who plays him for the majority of it. Keegan Delancey did not go on to be a particularly prolific actor, however, so whatever. Yeah, in Star Trek Online, they actually have Q Jr. as the Q who does the winter event. And he's not voiced by Keegan Delancey. Kind of a bummer, but whatever. Now, Q Jr., one of those things that gets particularly weird because Q Jr. is a brat who starts interstellar wars because he's bored and wants to see things explode. Yeah. Yeah. Not particularly nice, shall we say. It's actually so bad that Q threatened to turn him into a single-celled organism and leave him that way. Yeah. Anyway, though, but yeah, this is good, yet another idea as to what you could do with this, because having something like this pop up is something that the players aren't necessarily going to expect off the cuff. Because, like this episode, you knew that Q2 was involved with things because you had seen him on your ship and you were told that he was there. However, well, all sorts of weird screwball things happen. Like, we never actually see a real Chokuzan. We see Q masquerade as a Chokuzan, but we do not see any real Chokuzan. Are they a real species? Presumably, yes, but whatever. Going back to the female Q, though. Actually, I don't need to actually bring up a picture of her. The Q Civil War. Now, that was something that got kicked off by having Quinn commit suicide, and the fact that he chose to die rather than continue to live an immortal life as a Q. Well, you see, this is something that Voyager sees from terms of fallout and collateral damage, because the Q Civil War was causing supernova, spatial disruptions, and all sorts of weird stuff like negative density false vacuums. See, while this does get used as a method to pull the crew of Voyager into the Q continuum, um, highly disruptive. Anyways, though, the basic gist of that, of course, though, is that the Q are fighting over ideological differences about the right way to use their powers as Q, and so on and so forth. And also, um, do actual humans understand the specific details? No. Do they understand the fact that the Q are mad at each other and fighting each other? Yeah. Yeah, they do. Thing is, though, this, when it first popped up, was not something that the cast knew what was going on. They had to figure out what was going on the hard way. And that is something that made the episode very strange, because you see, the crew of Voyager, the entire main cast, don't know there's a Q Civil War going on. They were warned by the John Delancey Q that there would be fallout from allowing Quinn to commit suicide and so on and so forth. But that wasn't the. I don't think that was even the previous episode. That was a previous episode, but not immediately previous. So when the viewers watching the episode see this stuff, they're like, "Huh? What?" And don't really know what's going on until the female Q shows up. Because, yeah. And of course, you have the John Delancey Q talking to Janeway about trying to impregnate Janeway with his child, which, as we all know, he ended up creating a child with the female Q, which kind of sort of had the desired result of ending the Civil War. However, it also resulted in other things later that arguably were less bad than the Civil War was, but still not good. At any rate, though, this sort of thing is like having the players bear witness to the side effects of one or more Q doing Q things for Q reasons that aren't necessarily directly targeted at the players. That would be interesting. I mean, because like we see that the thing from the episode with Q2, where you have the Calamarain show up. Well, a other ship that was not the Enterprise in that situation would have no idea why the Calamarain was there. And that would be an interesting perspective to look at that episode from. Or one of these other episodes. It's because, like, Q pranks, when you're the target of the prank, you at least have the fact that the Q is messing with you as a reason for the Q to tell you what's going on. However, if you're a bystander, have fun with that. At any rate, yeah, April Fools, have fun with this stuff. Quite frankly, I don't actually particularly like the idea, except as a stupid side thing. I would not try to have a serious story arc based on this. It's too bonkers. You might like it. I don't personally. But having this something like this pop up as a gag in an episode that's not actually focused on it, that is something I think would actually be genuinely hilarious. Potentially, anyways. You never know. Alrighty then. Well, see you guys later.